Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto, and I'm here with the Sony RX100 Mark V, and I want to talk to you about the settings that you would use for vlogging with this camera. Well, when you buy the camera and you turn it on for the first time, it's very much in automatic mode. And though automatic mode works for some things, it just doesn't work for vlogging that well because you're constantly moving around and the camera is looking at the scene and environment changing around behind you, and it's trying to guess exposure and all sorts of other things, and it's just easier if you tell the camera what to do and leave it at that. If you've watched some of the top vloggers out there, you can see that the exposure of their footage is fairly consistent. The sky behind them isn't blown out that often, and everything just seems to look good. And that's because they shoot in manual mode and they don't rely on automatic settings. Now, the only setting that we're going to have to really rely on automatically here, besides autofocus, is audio, because this camera does not have a manual audio mode. It doesn't have a microphone jack, so we're not able to plug in an external microphone or anything like that. We wouldn't even have anywhere to mount it anyways. We have to rely on the internal microphones and the automatic setting that allows the audio to rise and fall as it seems fit. That's what makes this a great vlogging camera, because it's small and handheld, it's easy to carry around, but if you're wanting good audio quality, chances are you're probably going to need a bigger camera and a microphone, something that you have more control over. So besides the audio rant there, let's go ahead and get started and looking at the settings that we would change on this camera for optimal vlogging. All right, so like I said, this camera typically comes set in auto mode. If you haven't made any changes, the first thing that I would do is put your camera in movie mode, and then we're gonna go in and we're gonna start shooting in manual mode. So power on your camera, just like so, and we'll go tap on the menu icon. And we're gonna start by making one change. We're on the first pane here, and we're going to go over to our eighth tab where it says movie, and it will be set to program auto. Program auto means that it is shooting in auto mode. It's choosing your shutter speed, your aperture, your ISO, all of that stuff, and those are settings we wanna take control over. The way that you're gonna do that is by going down to manual exposure and setting manual exposure. That means that we're gonna have to tell the camera what settings to use, which if you're not very familiar in doing this might sound a little scary, but I'm gonna help you understand that it's really not that hard with this camera. So now that we've put it in manual exposure mode or manual mode, we are gonna go back to the beginning and we're gonna talk file formats. So most of us that shoot vlogs or that have shot vlogs or want to shoot vlogs know that we're gonna be editing that vlog. We're not taking just one clip out of the camera and uploading it. We're probably going to be editing it, and because of that, you want the best quality image that you can get for your editing process, and that is the XAVC SHD mode of your camera. Now, if you're going to shoot a 4K vlog, you'll definitely need to go into 4K mode, but know with this tiny camera, 4K mode eats through the battery really fast and then produces extremely large files that are timely to edit and export, especially if you are on a smaller laptop or something like that. So I recommend shooting in XAVCS HD, and then we'll go down to record setting, and I would shoot at 60p 50m. 60p is your frame rate, 50m is your bit rate, and with 60p it gives you enough headroom to make some files, make some clips slow motion. So if you want to retime a clip and make it slow motion because you got this really cool clip that would look cool if you slowed it down a bit, you have a little bit of room there because of your 60p image that you captured. Now, I have a whole video that I'm going to do on slow motion editing, but for right now, 60p is where you'd want it to set, and then when you create your timeline that you're going to edit in, you would want to choose either 24p or 30p, so that way when you drop in your 60p file or your 60p clip, you have a lot more data to work with, and when you stretch it out to be a slow motion clip, it has more frames to blend, and that means you're going to get a better quality slow motion clip than if you were shooting at 24p. A lot of people think put your camera in 24p because it gives you that film look, that cinematic look, and it does, but it doesn't give you any extra frames to work with in editing for doing slow motion. Basically, it is impossible to make a slow motion clip look good when it started out as a 24p clip. So I would choose 60p and leave it at that. So as we toggle through, important things to look at and remember is your ND filter. There are settings that I'm going to want to keep in the camera, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But that means that on extremely bright days, it's going to be harder to get the exposure right. And so you're going to want to remember how to get into the ND filter and turn your ND filter on or off. It is an electronic ND, but what ND does is it brings down the overall amount of light that's hitting your sensor. And what's good about that is that it gives you more room for your adjustments. And I used that so much when I'm outside on sunny days. I throw on that ND filter and then I have a lot more headroom. I don't have to totally screw up my camera settings just to get proper exposure, which then ruins the consistency between my clips. So ND filter, familiarize yourself with that one. White balance, I typically leave set to auto. However, if I'm in a room that has different color temperature lights, I tend to not use auto white balance because then the camera is changing the white balance and your skin at one side of the room may look a little blue and on the other end of the room may look a little orange. And so the best thing to do is to, when you're in a room and you're not outside where the light is consistent like the sun, or a room where maybe you're looking and you're like, boy, those light bulbs all look slightly different. I would toggle through these white balance modes and try and find one that looks best based on the room that you're in. Chances are you're not going to have a white balance card or a light meter or anything like that, a color meter that you're going to be able to use in the room. That's just not what we're doing here. So the best thing to do is just to use your eye and get it as close as you can in camera. Because yes, you can color correct in post-production in Final Cut Pro X or Premiere Pro or whatever, but color correcting is definitely harder when the color of your image is way off to begin with. So pay attention to white balance and kind of just keep in mind that it is important to be paying attention to the color of the image that your camera is capturing. Another thing that you can look at is your picture profile. Now, picture profiles changes what is applied to your image in the camera. And by default, it comes set to off. But there are some picture profiles that are really flat. And what's nice about that is that the flat profile gives you more room for color correction. And depending on what you're shooting and the look you're going for, you might even want to use a picture profile all the time anyways. But if you're like me and most other filmmakers, you're going to want the flattest picture profile possible so that you can drag some sort of color correction on top of the image. If you're not wanting to dig into this too much yet, I would just leave picture profile set to off, and then later on when you're thinking about stepping up your quality game of your footage, then you can start looking at picture profiles and syncing those across multiple cameras and all that fun stuff. It's definitely something neat that you can do, but it does require a lot of additional post-production work than just letting the camera do it naturally. So with that said, there are some other things that you can change in the settings of the camera, but I'm pretty much gonna leave those alone. Depending on how technical you wanna get, there are definitely things that you can adjust in the camera. But being that this is a vlogging camera, we want it to still have some of the automatic settings, some of the automatic things that the camera would do, like autofocus and all that good stuff. We just wanna make sure that we take control of the overall picture that we're getting. So down at the bottom of the screen here, you can see that we have our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO. Now, when you're shooting video, and earlier, as I mentioned, we are at 60p, you're gonna wanna set your camera at 1/60th of a second. And for me, I leave my camera there and never change the shutter speed. Unless I move my frame rate up to 120, then I would need to go from 1/60th to 120 so that I can get that 120 frames per second. But being that I'm at 60p with my frame rate, I want to put my camera at 1/60th. If I drop down below 1/60th on the shutter speed, I'm not going to get 60 frames. I might get 50 frames or I might get 40 frames. I'm not going to get exactly what I wanted. And so leave your camera on 1/60th. And then from here, you're going to make your adjustments either to your aperture or your ISO. So one of the really nice things about this camera is the ring on the front of the camera. By default, it changes the aperture of your camera, which also adjusts the exposure of your image just by rotating it. So as you can see, I rotate this ring here and it's changing the exposure of my image by changing the aperture of my camera. So when I am vlogging, when I'm holding the camera up in front of me and I've got my shutter speed at 1/60th and I need to make an adjustment, I could just really easily rotate the ring. I don't have any knobs or anything here like on a DSLR camera that makes it easy for me to just adjust the aperture. I need something on the back of the camera, and I can't reach the back of the camera. I'm kind of vlogging, and so I want it to be right here, and I want it to be easily accessible, and I can almost do this one-handed. I can hold the camera up and just rotate this with these two fingers while I'm holding the rest of the camera. I hold my camera with these two fingers here and then rest my other fingers on the side of the camera to brace it, and that gives me a little bit of exposure control on the fly. I don't have to reach up and make changes. I don't have to ruin my shot. If I walk out from under a tree into the sun, I could just simply make adjustments on the fly just by rotating, and it's extremely useful to have this feature. It's fantastic. So for me, most of my exposure control that I do is with aperture. When you're shooting B-roll and other stuff like that, you have a little bit more, you're behind the camera, you have a little bit more buttons available to you. So I can go over and actually adjust my ISO as well to compensate for my exposure. If I'm outside and it's super bright, I can then easily go in just by hitting like the function button, going down to ND, and I could turn my ND on and have my ND on so that I have more range for my exposure outside. It's just super easy to manage your exposure this way. So earlier I talked about all of these camera settings and they sounded scary because maybe you've never shot in manual mode before, but now this is starting to look a lot easier. Put your shutter speed at 1/60th. When you're outside, put your ISO, or you're inside, put your ISO somewhere in the ballpark of where you need it to be, and then just use that ring to rotate and change your exposure as you need it, so that way you don't have to ruin your clip, ruin whatever take that you're filming by going into the back of your camera and messing with the settings. Now, what this also does is it keeps you from relying on your camera to be in automatic mode. So when I'm pointing the camera at me, I can expose myself properly and also make sure that the background and everything behind me is exposed as best as possible. Obviously, you're going to have to learn where to place yourself when you're filming, how much light is falling on you versus the background. It's a lot of composition that you're going to have to figure out when vlogging. But having your camera settings under control and understanding how to make adjustments to them on the fly definitely helps you get there. And then all you have to think about is your environment, because it's second nature as to how you use your camera. Just now simply adjusting this ring, I'm actually gonna hit the movie button here, and I'm just kind of recording now. And you can see here I can rotate and make it darker. I could rotate and make it lighter and make any adjustment that I need. And as I walk outside or I do anything else, I can easily make those changes, and it's not such a crazy thing that's going to take away from the story that I'm trying to tell. So that's going to do it for my video on vlog settings for the RX100 Mark V. This camera is fantastic. I have a review of this camera coming up, and as I mentioned earlier, I also have a top 7 settings video that you should pay attention to as well. The more you use your camera, the more familiar you're going to be with it, and the better quality shots that you're going to be able to get. So I hope this video helped you understand a little bit more about the camera and how to use it in vlogging. Make sure to subscribe to our channel here if you want more tips like this and to be notified when they come out. And click thumbs up on this video and share it with somebody else who's interested in vlogging. I would greatly appreciate that. And thank you so much for checking out our video here on Ditch Auto. Link is in the description below to where you can pick up one of these cameras, see its specs and all that good stuff as well over on Amazon. Hope to see you next time. Thanks again.